a class action on behalf of some coal miners and their families who believe that the health of their workers suffered after their service to the mines is continuing. The miners developed incurable lung diseases, with some of them dying. Well, this is not the first time major mining companies face liability for health issues. Last year, gold mine workers who contracted silicosis and tuberculosis were paid over 1 billion rand as part of a major settlement involving Hoffmann Gold, Fields and Anglo-gold Ashanti, among others. Well, Spoor Incorporated is representing some of the mine workers. To unpack this further, we are joined by associate from Spoor Incorporated, Chloe Hoffmann. Chloe, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think that this is one of those stories that can very easily go forgotten, especially around this time of the year when we start looking at what the mining numbers are doing and we're not necessarily looking at the people that are keeping these mines going and how well taken care of they are. I mean, what is it right now that Spoor is focusing on in terms of this class action move?
Thank you so much for having me. You're exactly right. We had the Mining Indaba, the coal conference a couple of weeks ago, and we're finding focus on the industry and how it can continue to develop and produce coal, while forgetting about the mine workers that are underground that are extracting the minerals. So our firm is focusing on these class actions. They've been launched against 4 of the major coal mining companies in South Africa. The first being South 32, the second Anglo-American, the third Exxaro Resources, and the fourth Glencore. At the moment, we have launched our applications to certify a class action, which is the first stage in a class action lawsuit. We go to the court for permission to pursue a class action on behalf of the class as a whole. At the moment, we've launched that application. We have received notices of intention to oppose from almost all of the respondents. We have also had our first case management meeting with the DJP, the Deputy Judge President of the Johannesburg High Court, and so the process is well underway. We expect to receive the answering affidavits from the respondents on the 2nd of September this year.
Okay, so this class action, essentially, are we talking here about 1,500 miners? So I'm trying to get the size of the class action.
So at this point, there is actually no way of knowing how many mine workers will be or will form part of the class. That is the very nature of class actions. It's why we bring them. We suspect that the number of mine workers that will benefit from this class action, if it comes to its ultimate end, will be in the tens of thousands, in fact. That's number that you're referring to at the moment, 1,500, that's the number of mine workers that we have been in contact with who are likely at this point to be suffering from coal mine dust lung disease, which is the disease that we're pursuing the mine companies for. So that is our initial number. We believe it will be in the tens of thousands.
Because this is, and the reason why I ask about the numbers is because Spoor has been chasing these cases for a while. In fact, you had a historic 5 billion rand settlement in a silicosis case that had an estimated 15,000 to 500,000 gold miners who were part of the class action. So we're talking about massive numbers. So let's talk about some of the allegations, though, that you're putting on the table. One of the things that you've raised is that these 4 mining companies have failed to implement necessary and statutory safety measures. Can you give me examples of where you found that they've failed to do so?
Okay, so there's almost categories of health and safety measures that ought to be implemented by the mines that are intended to protect mine workers from occupational illnesses such as coal mine dust lung disease. The first category is training. The idea that mine workers will be better protected if they know how to protect themselves. How should you be wearing your PPE? How should you be operating underground? What can you do to protect yourself against the exposure to dust, which is the hazardous material which ultimately culminates in the illnesses? We find that training is almost particularly bearing in mind that our class period is from 1965 to the present. In the earlier periods of the class, that training was effectively a tick box exercise. It was, we've done this training and we've done what we can. In fact, the training was often just a tick box exercise. It often was not presented in languages that the mine workers could understand. It was a couple of hours, which is certainly not enough to explain the hazards and the dangers of working underground. So training, we feel, has been compromised. It's a tick box exercise. It's something that's rubber stamped by the mines.
Yeah.
The second category of protections that is for the mine workers is medical examinations. The mines are obligated to do statutory medical examinations once a year when the mine workers come in. We often, bearing in mind that we have been consulting with the mine workers alone, but we find that the mine workers are subjected to these medical examinations. They don't really know what's happening, and they are not given the results. They're simply told that you're good to carry on working underground. And of course, that isn't good enough. When you are subjected to medical examinations of this nature, you should be given the results. You should be explained. They should be explained to you. You should understand the progress potentially of your illness from year. That did not happen.
Yeah, so and I'll let you finish the last two. I just needed to speed it up a little bit in the interest of time. And you just to add on to those final two thoughts that you're gonna wrap up with there is what happens then, and what do you expect to happen where you've seen already miners having lost their lives? I mean, where do they go, particularly their families, that is?
Yes. So our class is formed of mine workers who are currently suffering from coal mine dust lung disease. That's the first subclass. The second subclass is the dependents of those mine workers who have already succumbed to their illness. Those who were forced to take care of the mine workers while they were suffering from these debilitating illnesses, often not being able to move because they couldn't breathe. So we are pursuing compensation on the part of dependents as well. They are the second subclass. We have many widows, many daughters, many sons who are acting on behalf of their families who have suffered the loss of a death of their parents. Yeah.
Okay, and I know that you're making a call out as well for widows and family members of deceased coal miners to reach out to Richard Spoor.
Yes, we would really appreciate that. We would like to get in contact with widows, dependents. It is important that we populate that class so that they are representing the rights of the bigger class of dependents. Okay,
and we'll obviously give details. They can contact you on info@rsinc.co.za. That's info@rsinc.co.za. I'm going to let you finish off those last 2 points that you made about how we need to be seeing compliance. And I raise this as well as a way to close it, not just so that we're speaking to the miners that need to make sure that when they go back home or go back to their employer, they're checking that those boxes have been ticked, but to the mine managers and also officials who are regulating the system as well to make sure that we're checking all of these issues. Otherwise, it becomes yet another class action in the future.
Exactly that. So the third and last category where we found that there's been non-compliance with safety and health regulations is with respect to PPE, personal protection equipment. These are, of course, the front line. It's what's protecting the mine workers underground. The most significant of which for coal mine dust lung disease are the dust masks. Again, later on in the class period, there's been more compliance, but certainly in the bigger and earlier part of the class period, dust masks were provided intermittently. They were not provided enough. We've heard of mine workers who were issued with one dust mask per week within an hour of being underground, bearing in mind that many of these men are so far underground that when they put their hand in front of their face, they cannot see it through the dust. They're given one dust mask. It is simply insufficient, and as you breathe that in, it's all just going into your lungs. And as you said, ultimately, our intention here is to obtain justice, some form of compensation for the mine workers who have already suffered from this illness. Yeah. But more importantly, on the worker protections that are implemented by the mines going forward. That is where we want to have a lasting impact. We need the mining companies to know that we are watching. Yeah.
I think it's a stern warning for the mining industry, particularly when you look at the fact that Richard Spoor certainly has had quite a successful track record in chasing some of these class actions. But thank you so much for joining us, Chloe. An absolute pleasure speaking to you. Chloe Hoffmann, of course, is associate at Richard Spoor Incorporated, speaking to us there.